Shavua Tov, Boker Tov. We're going to do a very, very short poem this morning. And because I'm going to be away a couple of weeks, I just wanted to make sure we finish it today. So I made it short enough that we're going to do that. But it's a famous little poem. And I want to introduce it, and that's going to take me a few minutes. There is a minhag. I don't know how many people really observe it. But there is a minhag to recite during the winter months from Rosh Hashanah until Pesach, until Shabbat HaGadol, until the Shabbos before Pesach. There is a minhag to recite Baruch Nafshi and the 15 Shir Amalos. And so I just decided I wanted to talk about that minhag, and I figured we would do one of the Shir Amalos, of which, like I said, there are 15. The minhag began, like so many of our liturgical minhagim, began in the 1500s. Apparently, there were people that did it before that, but as a minhag, it only started getting printed in Sidurim in the 1500s. And the one who explains it, by the way, and explains many things, is the Shnei Luchot HaBrit. The minhag started in Tzfat, apparently, but the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, who is the founder of the Horowitz line of the Boston Rebbe, their direct descendants, and other, Gedolim in the Hasidic movement, are direct descendants of the Shloah, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit. But he came from Europe after 1600. So after 1600, the economic situation in Tzfat deteriorated, and the Jews moved to where there were jobs and there was, some ability to support the community. And that in those days, that was Tveria. So the Shloah lived in Tveria from around 1615 till he died around 1625. And so he explained a lot of the minhagim, mystical minhagim that started in the 1500s. And he explained this one, specifically talking about the 15 Shir Amalos. And he said, we recite the 15 Shir Amalos during the winter months to stop the world from being destroyed. I don't know how many of you were worried about the world being destroyed, but there was a sense in the wintertime that things were bad. And they were bad on just the visuals. It was dark. I mean, was the sun going to come back? This is this sort of a remnant from primitive humanity that was really afraid in the wintertime. But there was another fear, the fear of starvation. If it wasn't a good harvest, the wintertime, you were hungry. It was just very dark and dismal, and it was very depressing. And apparently, David HaMelech, according to the Kabbalah, wrote the 15 Shir Amalos to save humanity from the flood, from there ever being another flood of Noah again. Now, we know Pshat on the 15 is the steps in the Beit HaMikdash. But apparently, there was also underneath the Rabbi, there was the Tahom. And you wanted the Tahom, which was the aquifer, the depth, the water in the depths of the earth, to come up enough to supply us with water. But you didn't want it to come up so high that it would flood you out. And flooding out was a fear in the wintertime. So we recited these 15 prayers so that the water would only come up the right number of steps, which was 15, to save us. There are other people that say that 15 saves us because it's the shortest name of Hashem, Yud and a Hey, that we don't use in the numbering system. Said we write Tedvav for 15, and that Ka is the shortest name of Hashem, and that's what we yell out when we're in trouble. And so we were reciting these psalms to literally save us during the winter months, because there was a fear that we wouldn't survive the winter. Up until very recently, in the United States, the number of deaths is highest in December and January. It's changing now because of flu shots and because of all sorts of things. But even until very, very recently, more people die in December and January than in the other months of the year. So the winter months were historically very scary. And so reciting the Shir HaMa'alos was like an antidote to the fear of the darkness and the dangers and the famine of the winter months. Also disease. There was much more disease in the winter months, of course, as well. But there was another psalm. The other psalm is a little bit more upbeat on its purpose, but still it sort of feeds into the same thing. Baruch Nafshi, which we did a couple of years ago. We'll probably do it again. It's an amazing poem. It's long. It takes a little while to get through, but the ideas in it are just amazing. And right after Rosh Hashanah, we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for creating the world. Baruch Nafshi is a poem about how the world really works. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu created things in such a way that it provides enough food for the animals, and it provides work for the humans, and it's really all about how the system of God's Bria, God's creation of the world, really works. So again, that's like a nice thing to recite during the winter time when things look like they're not working, right? There's not enough sunlight. There's not enough, heat. There's not enough, not enough food. When it looks like things aren't working, we read Baruch Nafshi to remind ourselves, yes, it really is working. And you just have to put things into a greater perspective. So we recite these poems during the wintertime because people were depressed and afraid during the winter months. And these poems were supposed to encourage us during this time period. We just go home for Shalosh Shudas. I mean, I got to be honest. Personally, I don't think I know anyone that does this minhag. Maybe you go to different shows than me. Oh, you really know people that really?
A couple of years ago, I was very makpid about it. I had a friend who was having some big issues. And his big mitzvah of the week was to host a huge Sudash Lishi. So I said this in the afternoon as a schut for him.
Very nice.
And I'm trying to reinstitute it this year.
No, good for you. No, good for you. But it's just one of those customs that most of us, the vast, just don't do. As opposed to Pirkei Avot. A lot of people say Pirkei Avot in the summertime, which is a much more uplifting and fun thing to do. Pirkei Avot in the summer is much more common than Shir HaMa'alos and Baruch Nafshi in the wintertime, in my experience. I haven't done a survey. But, but generally speaking, you don't see many people after shul. When I was a kid, there were a couple of, Europeans that stayed in shul after mincha and were reciting it in the wintertime. I saw a couple, but I don't see it very much. Oh, you see people do it, you talk about it in England?
Yeah, in London.
And people really sit down and recite it?
Yeah.
Oh, good. In America, and here in Yerushalayim, I don't see it.
Generally, it's part, and there's a suit in the shul, they won't do it. It's time.
Right. Yeah, in the wintertime, there's quite often a time issue. The afternoon isn't very long, but whatever. But the reason for it was people were really afraid in the wintertime. Please.
Is it custom to do it daily or every
Shabbat mincha time. I mean, the problem during the week, of course, is people are very busy. A lot of the customs that theoretically you'd say, oh, you should do this all winter long, but they do it on Shabbos because Shabbos they have the time. Okay, but I picked the shortest of them, basically, and it's a beautiful poem, and it's just an example of the Shir HaMa'alos. But I wanted to talk about that minhag here in the wintertime because it exists, but most people aren't aware of why. And the Shlosh says it's based on a Gemara in Kuf Nun Gimel Amid Aleph in Sukkah, where David HaMelech uses the 15 Shir HaMa'alos to control the water levels under Har HaBayit. And it's specific, and that feeds into our poem, because our poem Shir HaMa'alot LeDavid, it's one of the 15 songs of ascent written by King David, and it says Hinei ma tov u'ma na'im shevet achim gam yachad. I'll do you the favor and not sing it. There are many beautiful tunes for it that I could easily ruin. But it's, excuse me. But it says, behold, or notice, probably in modern English, you better pay attention to the fact. Hine, we don't usually say behold. I mean, that's like sort of like Shakespearean English. Okay, but hine means notice how good and how pleasant it is when achim, brethren, sit together, when there is peace and tranquility amongst the brotherhood, the tribe. Okay, the pshat on this poem is it was recited specifically at Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the commemoration of the drawing of the water on Sukkot, and that's according to the Gemara why David HaMelech wrote the poem. To supply the water to the right level was the 15 Shiramalos, because there was 15 levels for the water to ascend from the Tahom, the aquifer, up to the Gihon, the spring that was in Yerushalayim at Shar Hamayim. And so they would sing, and apparently the pshat on the poem of who are these brothers who find it so nice to be together and enjoying themselves together was specifically for Simchat Beit HaShoeva. So that's, like a beautiful idea that fits in with the entirety of the 15 Sheramalos. However, there are a lot of different opinions over what the brethren are. And the like I said, the most famous historical pshat is it meant the Jews coming to Yerushalayim for the celebration of Simchat Beit HaShoeva on Sukkot, the Ole Regel for Sukkot. Okay. However, if you look at the Radak who's just underneath, I put him on the page just underneath, he's talking about Al HaMelech HaMashiach VaKohen HaGadol. And he explains it more fully that the two brothers that have to get along were the two leaders of the Jewish nation, specifically the Kohen Gadol, whom we're going to talk about in the second pasuk in just a minute, okay? And the king, that the king and the Kohen Gadol have to get along, that there's two leaders, and those two brothers have to get along, and that's when the country is Tov and Na'im. When those two leaders get together, and of course, many Meforshim specifically go back to Moshe and Aharon. That Moshe was Ki'ilu, the king, and Aaron, of course, was the Kohen Gadol, and that they got along, and that's what we want to happen. Whether the king is King David or the king is coming back from Bavel, Zerubbabel, okay? Doesn't make any difference. The king should get together and get along with the Kohen Gadol, and together they should rule the country in a pleasant way. What else could it mean? So the Malbim says, it's those two brothers who really did get along, Zvulun and Yisachar. That the brothers it's talking about was Zvulun and Yisachar, who one of them was the great scholar and one of them was the great merchant, and one supported the other so that he could study Torah, and that they shared the combination of livelihood and spirituality, and that is the prototype that is being described in our poem. Okay? So that's a beautiful pshat. And Malbim actually believes that it is the pshat, the literal meaning, that the two brothers that lived together so beautifully were indeed Zvulun and Yisachar, at least in the earlier days. There's an interesting pshat, and I think it's Hirsch, but I'd have to check exactly. I think it's Hirsch that says it, that it's the same person. that each one of us are many people during our lives. You know, Shlomo HaMelech said that there are 7 ages to man, so did Shakespeare. That we go through 7 stages, but according to the pshat here is everybody is both a na'ar and a zaken, and that the 2 parts of me, the na'ar part of me, the earlier youthful part of me, and the older, hopefully more sagacious part of me should somehow find a unity and a harmony. That my life shouldn't be a cacophony of different principles and different realities. That I should find in my life a harmony, that I can feel good and pleasant about myself. You find a lot of people who look back on their earlier years with disappointment and with angst, and it's sort of sad. It's sort of sad. But we should find in ourselves, you know, this sense that our lives were spent in the proper way. We didn't waste. You know, we did what was right during that period of our lives to come to where we are now. And that's just an interesting approach that I wouldn't have come up with on my own. But I'm pretty sure it's Arden Hirsch. And the last shot I'm going to share right now, I want to talk about something else when we get to the end of the poem, is that it's a nevuah for either Shivat Zion in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, that the Jews from Chutz La'aretz and the Jews in Eretz Yisrael were different and brethren coming together. And there's another version of that it's a future of the kibbutz galiot, of the ingathering of all of the exiles in the future redemption, and that they should live together in harmony. I want you to know, I think overall, the Jewish state today is in a pretty good position vis-a-vis the different edot that live here. That wasn't true in the 50s. In other words, we look at our government, and we see, there's Sephardim and there are Ashkenazim and there are Russians, and we see that overall there's a pretty good mix in the political landscape of leadership. That wasn't always true. And I think as time goes on and our democracy matures here in the Medina, Baruch Hashem, I think it's happening in a positive way. It just so happens that my mechutin alav shalom, my son-in-law's father, was Dr. Avner Shaki. He was the first non-Ashkenazi to lead a party in the history of the Medina, and that was in the 90s. He became the head of Mafdal, and it was just an interesting situation. Until then, there had never been the head of a party who was non-Ashkenazi. And now, of course, there are parties that are non-Ashkenazim and gather numerous seats, and you see the names in the parties are more mixed. But up until the early 90s, Ashkenazim ran the country, and they tended to look down their noses on the other Eidot. Maybe I should erase this. This is not so nice. But anyway, but Baruch Hashem, I think we're doing much better, and that's Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. That the kibbutz galiot is working. It takes time, but it Baruch Hashem, it's working, and that's the fifth shot on what's going on here. But I want to talk about the phrase matov u'manaim. Now, what does that mean? Now, translated, it means how good and how pleasant. But we Jews are never satisfied with that, just a translation. What's the difference between good and pleasant? And the normative approach to understanding that is good means objectively good. And na'im means subjectively good. And the analogy that's often given is medicine. Sometimes medicine is good for you and you have to take, however, it's often very unpleasant. But the situation that's going, so objectively it's good, but subjectively it's something that you don't like. Sometimes the things that subjectively you like very, very much, everybody can fill in the blank there, whether it's chocolate cake, no matter what it is, there are a lot of things that are very pleasant out there, okay, but really aren't that good for you objectively, and you end up paying for it, down the line. But what's going to happen when this situation develops here in the Medina, here in Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be both objectively good and subjectively pleasant. Some people translate the terms a little bit differently, that Tov is more physical. It's physically going to be good, and Na'im is more spiritually good, which is also a fine pshat. Even though I personally prefer the first one, but we do believe that the two terms are different in what they are describing. That David HaMelech, as the great poet that he was, didn't repeat himself. Hi, Shavuot. Every idea stands independently. What do we do with the word ma? The repetition of the term ma. How good, he named matov umanaim, how good and how pleasant. So there's a Hasidic Shavuot that ma stands for me'ani, what am I? That the goodness and the pleasantness comes from people asking the question ma. It comes from anivut. When the brothers have humility, when they behave modestly, that's when it is so wonderful. It's ma. It's when people say, me'ani, who am I? What am I? I'm not more important than you. And when we start to think that way, that's when things are tov and na'im. And there are a number of Hasidic Rabbeim that give that pshat on the pasuk, and it's really a nice pshat. It's so much easier for people to sit together and enjoy their company if egos are set aside. That's when it really is tov and na'im, and that's when the achim, the brethren, can really sit together in peace, tranquility, goodness, when everything is really, really good. Okay, now we have to get to the nitty-gritty of the poem. I mean, the poem first describes, this wonderful, beautiful, idyllic setting, but the details of it are fascinating. And the details describe two things. They describe shemen and mayim. So if we go with the pshat, that shemen, that we're talking about the Kohen Gadol and the Melech, that generally the shemen is the Kohen Gadol. I know the king also gets anointed, but initially the first person to be anointed was the Kohen. Aaron was anointed before any kings were. And Mayim represents the physical well-being of the land, and that's the king. So we've got the spiritual in the shemen, and we've got the physical in the mayim. So bet is about the oil. Well, let's quickly do the oil. We'll see the water is going to take a little bit longer. Okay. Kashemen hatov al harosh yored. So in other words, the pleasantness is like the oil dripping down, the good oil, the precious oil, the oil from the Beit HaMikdash, the Shemen HaMishchab, that preciously purified oil over the head descends. Al Hazakan, on the beard, Zakan Aharon, the beard of Aharon. Now, Zakan doesn't just mean beard. And of course, they only put a few drops. The image of the oil descending and covering his entire body, which we're going to see in the next, it actually covers his garments as well, is an image that isn't pshat. Pshat is just a couple of drops, and perhaps a little bit came off of his hair, but basically it was on his head. The image is he's consumed, he is totally enveloped by the oil, which represents his office, and it initially goes on to his zakan. The beard, the Jewish beard represents wisdom. I mean, the zaken, is the elder, and it comes from the word for beard. And it's just fascinating. Even in ancient depictions of Jews, they always had luxurious beards. I mean, it was a big deal historically. There's a famous, there's a copy of it in the Israel Museum of this monumental stela, that the tall pillar from Assyria, showing all of these kings coming to bring their tribute to Nineveh. And the Jews are easily identified. Number one, they have tzitzis on their clothing. They have these robes that have strings on the corners, so you can see their tzitzis, number one. And number two, they all have these luxurious beards. So the zakan represents the respect that the elder gets for their position and for their scholarship. So the oil, number one, envelops the beard, representing their status as an elder and scholar. Then, sheyored al pi midotav, and it goes all the way down to his, now midotav here is probably madotav, his garment, his madim. Modern Hebrew, madim is your uniform in the army, but madim in those days meant the garments of the Kohen Gadol. Four for a regular Kohen, 8 for the Kohen Gadol. It enveloped, it covered all the way down his robes of office. Now, of course, it says midotav, so it not only includes his garment, it includes his behavior, his midot, his character. So the oil. Now, why is it so important? Why is it so important that the Kohen Gadol is represented with oil? What is there about oil as opposed to the water, which we're going to talk about in Gimel? Ultimately, for the country, water is more important. I mean, for the ultimate survival of the country, the water is more important. That we're going to talk about in Pasuk Gimel in the last verse. But what does oil represent? It represents the calmness. You oil on the water calms. It represents the steadiness. It represents the tranquility. So some people say that in the poem, the oil represents the na'im from the first verse, and the water, which is the objective goodness for the land that gives us, wealth and gives us prosperity, that's the tov. So that the oil is the na'im, it's pleasant, it's nice, okay? And the water ends up being the tov. I mean, that's not pshat, but another way of looking at what's going on in the poem. So we've got in Pasuk Bet. So we have here in Pasuk Bet that the Kohen Gadol representing the nation in two ways. Number one, the zikna that represents his wisdom and scholarship, and the midotav, which is both his garments of office, but also his character. And that's what we want from the Kohen Gadol, that the Kohen Gadol should be a great scholar, but also a person with impeccable character that we can look up to and honor and respect. And that was very important that the Kohen Gadol represented that. And, and later, when it didn't happen that way, and the Kohanim Gedolim had become corrupt. It was very terrible for society. In the last years before the destruction of the Second Temple. Now we get to I guess we could say the weather pasuk. Now, tal in the poem definitely just means water. Now, tal here does not mean dew necessarily. Tal on the Hermon represents all manifestations of precipitation. And right now on the Hermon is snow. Okay, so the tal is also the snow of the Hermon. I remember once in the 90s that we had a very snowy winter, and the summer afterwards we went to the Golan, and it was either late June or even early July, and you could still see snow on the Hermon. It was very impressive. It was like going to the Rockies, Lahavdil, and seeing, even in the summertime, you see like the, snow-capped peaks. But the Hermon was like that, a couple of years in the 90s. And it was very, very impressive. Kital